What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Dynasty Underdog. Billy Beeman, Jake Kornblum here. No Uriah, but that's okay. I really quickly wanted to start the show by giving a quick shout out to the Discord. It's been on fire lately. Jake popped in a question there, just kind of wrapping the season up, just kind of how everybody's done, and we just a ton of feedback. Not necessarily anything we're gonna like run through on here, but just another shout. Get in there, get in the Discord, find a way in there, hit us up. It's just a great time in there. Really, really good topics just popping up, good conversations. It's a lot of fun in there. And just want to get more people involved in there. So thanks for doing that, Jake. How you doing before we get moving on here? How you doing? What's up?
Doing well, man. I was out and about, just came back from a walk. It was really nice. Not raining today, which is always a perk in Portland. So yeah, dude, I'm loving it. I'm loving it. How about yourself? How are you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, I went on like multiple walks today because I go on like too many because of my dog, but also
that makes sense.
With my daughter. It's so nice out, dude. Like when it's nice out in Florida, we got to take advantage of it. It's probably like 60s, 70s, just clear skies, beautiful out here. So feeling the good weather, love it.
Love that.
It. I call it football weather. But
Florida football weather.
Florida football weather. Yes, yeah. Exactly. All right, we'll get rolling on the sheet here. News and nonsense. A couple quick ones. One that we're going to start with is Jonathan Brooks. Sheesh, retore the right ACL. I did not expect that coming through the news wire over this week or weekend. But geez, are we buying? Are we out? What are we doing if already rostered? I mean, I'll throw it to you. I know my answers, but what do you think, Jake?
I actually am open to buying. I would also say that I'm also out at the same time, if that makes sense. Okay. I'm willing to buy, I think, at a very, very discounted price or sending a very specific type of roster piece. I'm talking about like a Marshawn Lloyd, like that, like middle tier running back that could potentially come back into the fray, probably near NFL playoffs. Maybe like Lloyd in a third or something back for Brooks, knowing that I probably can't touch Brooks for another whole season. I am assuming he probably doesn't take a snap until December of 2025. Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, that's super cheap. I wonder if anybody moves him for that price. Yeah, if you have him rostered, I feel like you got to just kind of hold and hope for the best, because otherwise you're looking at offers like what Jake is sending out. I mean, I wonder if somebody would take a 26 second for Brooks in like a third or something, just to like shed off of Brooks or churn off of Brooks rather. That may be something that could get done. But yeah, if we're talking like the third round pick plus range, that may be where you start. Like start with a couple third round picks, or plus a player, kind of like Jake was talking about. That might work out better, or you may be more successful that way. Okay.
Would you send Benson?
Well, did I say Benson? I didn't say Benson.
No, I said would you? Oh. Would you send Trey Benson, giving his underperforming
straight up? Yeah. Sure. Yeah, I would do that. Yeah. I think so. I'm trying to think. I mean, I like Trey Benson enough, but like, I don't know. It's an interesting one. Like, I kind of like it both ways. Depending on what you're trying to do. That's where I was kind of like, where my head was going. Like, would I just take Trey Benson as well? It's like, yeah, I would. Would I like take Jonathan Brooks in the right situation? Yeah, I would do that too, I think. What's up, fellas? Upcoming running back class will make it even harder to trade Brooks for anything of substance. That's kind of a good point. So, I mean, yeah, that's the idea, though. So, like, if you can move him for a second in kind of the way that I was saying before, maybe that is what you prefer to do, right? Like, packaging him plus a late round pick for a second, maybe the best move to kind of just churn that and move on there. So, yeah, it's a good point with the incoming running back class. It's definitely going to shake things up a bit. But that said, we had that same concern with this last running back class, and haven't seen a ton of success from that running back class, especially in taking over. And that's why we have a bunch of old ass running backs leading the pack right now. And so we got to be careful in terms of, making those kind of predictions or assumptions, I guess, heading into the new season. Even though it is a better running back class, it should impact things. To Eric's point there, yeah. Any final thoughts on that, Jake? Before I move on.
No. I think that's a great closing point. I appreciate the commentary, Eric.
Okay, should we be selling Chase Brown even as contenders?
Yeah. As point blank as that sounds, yes. I think you can really get off Chase Brown and get into a much better tier of running back as well. I think Chase Brown is a great way to get into future potentially late first round draft capital to other contenders. I'm not necessarily always into the idea of giving up points to other contenders that could potentially beat you. So it'd be obviously more enticing to sell to maybe a middling team, but by all means, like if I can get any type of first for Chase Brown right now, I absolutely would. In another league, I ended up selling Chase Brown in a third for Jonathan Taylor. That just made a lot of sense. Jonathan Taylor on a bit of a decline over the last few weeks. Chase Brown, hot as hell, really does kind of, I don't know, mess with people's emotions, I think, at different times of the season. I think we can get kind of creative and move Chase Brown around in different ways. And I just don't see that long-term of a future for someone like Chase Brown, especially like to Eric's point. I think the upcoming running back draft class puts us into a better situation for wanting to get onto some just better premium running backs.
Eric would sell Chase Brown for any first, but a 26 base random first is more enticing than a guaranteed late 25 first. Yeah. I mean, that's fair. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. I think I agree overall with what you're saying, Jake. I think we're going to talk about this a little bit more, but I do think one of the tougher things to do is shed off points as a contender, depending on your level of contender and what player we're talking about. Like it definitely shifts kind of how much you need to react or trade or I guess the calculation of should I make this move or not. But I do think that you can make some pretty lucrative moves by doing it at this time because people need things. And if you have a surplus, you should probably, make some get a return on investment on those. And it's stuff we've talked about over the last like probably 3 or 4 weeks about like preparing for the playoffs and all that kind of stuff. I think it all kind of ties together. Okay, that's all I got for news and nonsense. Let's move on to trade creativity. I think this is a fun topic. I'm not entirely sure where you're gonna head with it initially here, but I have my own ideas too. So let's talk a little bit about it. Trade creativity. What does lack of creativity look like? Again, this is giving Jake his credit here. He created this sheet, and so I'm not going to just throw it to you because I assume you have an answer. But for me, just when I think about this, it's like a trade that is like for just like a really kind of raw example, trying to trade like Jerry Jeudy and something for Justin Jefferson off of that big game, right? Like nobody's going to do that. Like that's not creative. In my opinion, that's lacking creativity. That's very like obvious, right? It's just trying to get a premium asset for a fleeting, bit of production. And so that's kind of what I think about when I think of like, what does the lack of creativity look like? But where were you kind of thinking about that, Jake?
Yeah, no, I think that's actually a really good answer. And I didn't even think of it like that. I was actually more so thinking about how we, especially in the community, tend to people who create content, I'll call it content creators, we tend to value everything in draft capital. And I think by doing that, we are setting a really bad precedent more often than not to a lot of our listeners, because a lot of time people hear that jargon and I think they actually use that jargon not as valuation, but actually as a means of sending out trades. And so, especially like later on in the season, I've noticed I've been receiving a lot of trades that are just very stagnant. And by stagnant, I mean literally like player A for X value of draft capital. If you say that this player is worth 1.5 firsts, I'm getting 1.5 firsts worth of draft capital in return. And I think this is actually the most important time of the year to be really creative with your trades, because you really need to think about and contextualize what someone else is doing with their team. And you need to be aware of that throughout the entire season. And we've talked about this many times throughout the actual point scoring season. But I think more so now than ever before, like, if you move a team away in the wrong direction, these offers tend to be borderline offensive. Like, if you are sending someone future draft capital for, a 25 to 26 per game scoring player, like, I don't really think any amount of draft capital is going to get that player off that roster unless you actually can put some points back onto the roster, depending on how the roster is built. And I think that's kind of like where we need to start thinking a little bit more about how we, interact with other managers. We're always so conscientious of the individual interaction of, like, how can I kind of like swindle the other person? But the swindling, and this is something that Billy is really good at, by the way, not to, you know, take away some of the accepted trades that have gone through, but you're very good at the compounding value perspective. And by that, I mean, you can capitalize on the fact that if I present you so many points on your roster, you'll take on those points thinking that you're actually acquiring more than you are, knowing that the reality is you're not going to start all of them. And I put this into consideration because, like I said, I've been receiving a lot of offers of late for players that just don't really make sense, right? Like, they're deals that just aren't very logical. And here's a really good example of it. And I think I ended up sending it to you via text. I received a secondary one, but basically, on one of my very contending teams, it's very much aging out. And I'm receiving in the trade Alvin Kamara and T. Higgins and a third for JSN and Ferguson. And it's like, on value perspective, it's a totally fine trade. I'm not offended by the value. It's just like, when you look at my team, it doesn't actually help in any single position. Like, there's not a place where either of those players are adding a premium to what's already happening on the roster. And so I'm trying to ask us, as like other competitors within the game, like, we need to be more creative in how we approach people like me. Cause, like, I think that this roster is specifically one that you could take advantage of in kind of my more, I guess, vulnerable state, right? Like, because it's aging, like, move well with it. And that's what I'm thinking a little bit more of when I think of trade creativity. Does that align with you? Does that all kind of make
Oh
sense?
yeah. Oh yeah, no, that totally makes sense. I think kind of looking, I mean, one of the first things I do when I'm making a trade is like, it's like, what do I want? Okay, go to the team. It's like, what do they have? What do they need? It's like, if I send them this, are they going to be like, I don't need that? It's like those kind of things are like just very basic parts of the exercise for me. And I think that goes directly to what you're talking about. Like, I wasn't thinking of it necessarily like that, because when I saw like the trade creativity title and just some of the things it's like, how creative can we get literally with the trades? Because it's like, there's only certain, like, we have players and we have picks. You know what I mean? So like, we
Yeah.
can get creative in terms of like, trying to concoct different combinations and whatnot. But I think what you're talking about is huge, because yeah, like, we get trades all the time that make absolutely no sense, or where you're getting, where you're getting supreme value on one side and significantly undervalued on another side. And even if like you're a rebuilding team and one side is picks, but it's super undervalued, it's like still that lacks creativity. Again, it's like, if you want something from me, let's come up with something that's going to make sense, like, and it's not going to have me laughing as I reject this trade. And so I think that goes to what you're talking about here. And like, how can we create or educate people to do this better? I don't know. I mean, I think it's just kind of what we're saying. It's like moving away from that kind of engagement, that kind of interaction where you're sending those kind of offers, just becoming a little bit more pointed and purposeful with your trading, right? Like, what you're trying to get done. and actually sending something that is going to create a conversation or create a back and forth at the very least, if not just get done. Which, I mean, we're proponents of not, I mean, I shouldn't say we, but I should. We're not trying to send our best offer initially. Like, nobody is saying to do that at all. But that's part of, I guess, the creativity, right? Is like finding a way to do it where you're masking it at least on your end, or it doesn't just look completely lopsided, or like I was saying at the beginning, just doesn't make sense, where it's like, yeah, you're obviously trying to sell me some guy who's not going to have that much value 6 months from now for a guy who's going to be valued in like the top 5 startup pick, you know?
Yeah.
And so like that's kind of where my head is at there. But we can kind of move forward here. How does one approach playoff trading from the perspective of a rebuilder? So I guess on the creative side of things, still talking a little bit there, but yeah. So how does one approach playoff trading from the perspective of a rebuilder? I'll let you jump in on this one. I mean, I have thoughts for sure. But what do you think here?
Yeah, I think, well, God forbid your league doesn't have a trade deadline, but if it does, this conversation is unfortunately not for you. So skip forward to minute mark 29. I don't know, but I think it's really important to think through kind of the same dichotomy that you were just talking about, like tackling and understanding the league nuances. So being able to dive into the other contenders of your league's rosters and understand kind of like where their weaknesses lie. Try and help build into those positions and present the value as in like, I am going to upgrade this for you and it's going to come at this cost, right? Like, there needs to be some type of push and pull situation. And if you're unable to show the value proposition immediately to somebody else, is kind of the way I see it from a rebuilder's perspective to the contender, you're not going to find a way to get that deal done, even in like multiple iterations. And I find that almost always, if the first offer in these types of negotiations, typically between a rebuilder and a contender, aren't there from the onset, they almost never get there. Now, from the opposition perspective, as a contender trying to buy off of a rebuilder, I've noticed it the other way around because of, I think, one person is trying to do something to help contend this season. So their, I guess, their motivation is a bit different. Whereas when a contender is getting an offer from a rebuilder, there's almost like an underlying connotation to the offer that like, oh, what is it that I'm missing? Like, what are you trying to gain from this that I am like not understanding from surface level? And so typically it's trying to get off of older players. And I think we need to try and move away from that mentality at all times and try and think of different ways to package those older players with other enticing pieces that make the deal almost more of an equilibrium. By all means, like, there are going to be leagues, there are going to be situations where you can send, Derrick Henry for a contending first, and that's going to get a deal done. I'm not telling you that that can't happen. I'm just saying that when we're trying to be more nuanced in our trading, it's really important to be kind of more, I guess, fulfilled with the way that we're reviewing rosters instead of seeing them as these like blanketed slates. This is player A, this is player B. I know the gap between the two of them is C. I'm just going to add that over here, and that's how we're going to get this deal done, because it almost never works like that. What about you?
Wow, a lot of stuff there. Kind of thinking about the next point here, and I'm going to probably kind of combine them a little bit. But I'm just trying to like process everything as I want to move forward here. Because I agree with a lot of what you're saying, and I think that as a rebuilder in these situations, especially, if you're not eliciting the trade, if somebody's coming to you, it's like, I do feel like you kind of have a power position there where it's like, I need something to give you these points, first of all, right? You brought up a lot of different scenarios, but that's kind of one thing I'm thinking about, is like the value that's coming back to the rebuilder needs to be fairly significant, because it's like, what am I getting out of this? What's the point? Like, you're obviously going for a title. What am I doing? Right. Like, and it's a little bit more risky for me to be doing that. that was one part of it. Also, I mean, we have, just like as a sub note here, our picks less valuable right now during the season, and I don't think they're less valuable, but they should be more accessible, right? Like they still have value, but people are willing to give them up more often, or should be willing to give them up more often, or you should be able to access them easier from contenders who want something that you may have. But something you said made me think about the next point here, which is like, how does one approach playoff trading from the perspective of a middling playoff team? So like similar conversation, but just a little bit different context of like where your team is at. And are you maximizing value to other contenders, even if it limits your chances of winning in a given week? And so just one situation that I just had in a trade I got done kind of really fits, I feel like, what we're talking about here. Kind of both things, like you were saying before, we need to get away from just like trying to sell like older players, or sell, like I was saying, just like players who have stigma or who have fluctuating values, transitory values, as I like to call it, like those kind of things, like without it being a fair trade, or properly accounting for that risk and all that in there. Um, and so it was trying to get off of Jerry Jeudy and Keenan Allen, or basically realizing, okay, I'm in the playoffs here. Let's take a step back. I'm in the playoffs here, talking about like a middling team in the playoffs. I'm in the playoffs. My team is pretty good, scores a lot of points, but I can see at the top, like, this team doesn't really have the juice, right? And so I'm like, can I move off of some riskier assets, some older assets, even though I'm contending, go to other contenders and see if they need what I have, right? And I think that's a smart move, because like you're hedging your bets a little bit, especially if you have enough depth and you can still at least insert some points. Like, it makes a lot of sense. Like, move off of these players, get some future value, whatever. And so we were trying to get stuff done for a while. I was trying to get a first, so he just wanted Jeudy for a second, and it ended up being Jeudy and Keenan Allen for Michael Pittman in a second. And that felt like a really like fairly valued trade for the most part, but also one that made a lot of sense for a team that is kind of uncertain about its competitive nature. You're getting back pretty close value on one side of it. You're getting a pick probably for an older player. You can kind of break it down however you want, but either way, it made a lot of sense to kind of think forward, is kind of what I'm getting at here, for one of those middling playoff teams, or for a team, in the playoff. That's kind of like how I'm approaching that idea of like maximizing value, even though you're contending. And I think I talked about this a week before or so, but like, I think that's something we should be doing, because everybody wants to hold on to their stuff or buy stuff right now, And so if you feel like you have enough depth, I do think that it's the time to kind of look around at the competition and say, what can I move off of? Also, Jerry Jeudy is not a piece, in my opinion, that is going to keep up the level of production that he was, that we saw with like the 40-point game and that kind of stuff. And it's like, especially into the future, maybe he can do it towards the end of the season, but it's that push and pull, right? That balance of like, is this going to impact me that much, or is this somebody who I don't believe in that much, that like there's a reasonable factors that that should lead me to believe these things, then like, okay, I can move off of this guy for this, and I think it makes sense in that way. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or any further thoughts on kind of the final 2 points there.
I don't have any thoughts on the actual trade itself, but I do really
Yeah.
like the way in which you maneuver through it, both like logically and also how you move through your own team, and kind of saw like what its ceiling was. It's interesting because I don't want to recommend the idea of like sabotaging your chances of winning in a given year, or removing points from your team just for the sake of it. Like, the reason that you'd be doing this is truly to be giving your team better chances to win in the upcoming season, and knowing that once you're in the playoffs, hopefully that your team is built well enough, can still contend, right? Like,
Right.
you're not taking away all chances of your team being able to contend now that you've gotten rid of, in this circumstance, I think this is a perfect circumstance of how to do it at its like most premium level. Taking a guy like Jerry Jeudy and Keenan Allen, who are both performing well over the last 4 weeks, probably not this past week as much for both of them, but prior to this past week, and going in on a player who is underperforming this season, and getting future draft capital as well on top of it. So like, I think that's a really, really creative way to kind of understand, evaluate where your team is at, and then kind of, for lack of better words, improve upon specific roster spots that are already sitting there. Because you wouldn't be able to get a second for Keenan probably straight, even with his performances prior to this past week. So I think that's a great way. And I wouldn't say that that's necessarily the only path for middling teams, because I do think that one of the really interesting things, and there's a trade further down in the trade section, is the idea of getting off of more premium assets that are considered more premium, replacing their points for really, really cheap assets, and then kind of covering that value gap with future firsts and seeing ways in which you can kind of maneuver around that. That's kind of how I would actually want to use a guy like Chase Brown. Like, if there's a way for me to get off of a premium running back, for instance, like this is probably something you could have done a few weeks back, but maybe someone like a Breece Hall. And I don't think a lot of people are going to agree with this, and that's totally fine. But like me personally, I would love to get off of a Breece Hall for Chase Brown and probably 2 firsts if I could. And I think I could have probably done that about 2 or 2.5 weeks ago. So like,
Not right now.
not right now, of course. But I think like that's the type of move that you'd be going for. You don't lose any points, and you're really setting your team up for the subsequent future, because that's truly what you're trying to do on a cyclical process within a dynasty lens. The other thing that I did want to talk about that we haven't gotten to is, how do you go about those negotiations though, as the middling team? Like, I do think that this is even harder to do than the rebuilder sending an offer to another contender. Because like, you are coming at this from like a very interesting lens of potentially this could be the person you're going up against this upcoming week. So like, how do you push a trade offer into their purview and say, hey, this is something that is actually really going to benefit both of us. I'm thinking, to me, that I have no chance in this upcoming week, but you have a chance after this week. Keep moving, keep doing your thing. But like, I don't think like our natural inhibitions tell us that that's okay. Like, there's something about it that probably pushes us back and says, I don't trust this for one bit. Like, what's the catch here? Do you think that you've had any difficulties trying to do this between a middling team and another playoff team, or do you find that this is just another trade negotiation?
I mean, I think that there's some differences, but I haven't found really difficulty. I think that there's some freedom this time of year in understanding like where you're at and coming to terms with where you're at, which is hard to do throughout the year as you're like trying to get to the playoffs most of the time and fighting for that. But once you get there, I do think it's easier to look around and be like, how good of a chance do I really have in like competing with these other teams? And so for this league specifically, and obviously it ranges differently. Like if you're closer to the top, or you're closer, you're say a bye team, you have one of the top 2 seeds and you have a bye week, and it's like, yeah, then it's a little bit harder to like, am I going to be giving my opponent who I'm facing next week a good player? Like the calculation definitely changes a little bit there. Though I think with a lot of the pieces I'd be willing to move around this time are pieces that I don't fully believe in. So I think that I would let go of that feeling a little bit. But again, with like a middling team, I think there's some freedom in saying, okay, I am, this is the team I am. I'm, punching above my weight class a little bit right now. Let me just, and this is what I just did personally. I went over to the person in their DMs and I was like, he was like, oh yeah, we're both competing. And I was like, look, I don't really think I have the juice. Like, I just don't. And so I'm looking ahead to the future a little bit. And that's kind of where I'm at. And so if I have some stuff that you can use, plus I know that you're obviously, I wasn't saying this part of it in terms of the Jerry Jeudy part, but like, I know that they're interested in Jerry Jeudy. They want this guy. So it's like, if there's other stuff that you can use along with what you're actually trying to get, I'm trying to get like some premium future picks here. And obviously he realized that it wasn't just going to come to the, a second round pick for Jeudy. I needed some extra added on that. And so came to that, that agreement. But I think the point stands. Just you're talking about the negotiation part of it. I think sometimes when you understand where your team's at and you've settled on what you're going to do and the path you're taking forward, it allows you to be a little more loose with your what your actual strategy is, because it's crunch time here. Like, it almost doesn't matter that they know now what's happening, because we're almost at, it's dynasty, it never ends, but like this is kind of a cutoff point where things are going to change after the end of the season a little bit, right? And so it's like, if in short term I let you know my strategy a little bit, like I don't think it's going to impact me long term, and it's only going to help me get this trade done. So that's how I think about it.
Yeah, I love that. And it goes into the last part of the question is like, do you show any skin? And it sounds like you did. It sounds like you were vulnerable in these specific negotiations. And I think that vulnerability, even if it's potentially a lie, I don't know. It doesn't sound like it is, but even if it is,
Not
it could help. It could help a trade get done. So that's awesome. I just want to say as well, I had predicted that section would be over by the 29th minute. I was off by 2 minutes, but that's okay. We powered through it. We powered through it.
Pretty good. Pretty
Yeah.
good. Okay, cool. I love that conversation. I think that's really good. The trade creativity is a hard thing to master. The trade negotiations, it's an art. So I think it's always good kind of working through different aspects of that. Let's move on. The tale of the 101. So I think we're reaching back to the last episode a little bit here to just get a follow up. How many times have we been told a future for? Oh wait, no. Sorry, that was a different topic. Okay, the tale of the 101. How many times have we been told a future first will be the 101 and hasn't panned out? Okay. I mean, where was your head at on this one, Jake?
Yeah, this isn't supposed to be like a thing that, you have to give a number. This is more so about this like thing that we do to lie to ourselves. I think more often than not, when we're acquiring what looks like a bad roster's first. And this happens quite frequently. I hear it all the time. People say to themselves early in an upcoming season, like, oh, I have a 26 first from that team. It's going to be early. Or I have a 27 first. It's going to be early. And you're just like, oh, okay, cool, bro. Like, that's awesome. Well, that happened this year in DU2, where a buddy of mine acquired the 101 in DU2 for Puka Nacua. And you know what? If you said to yourself, Ashton Janty for Puka Nacua straight up, I'd say to you, that's fine, but I don't necessarily like the process. That's how I would approach that conversation. But that's not how the conversation went. The conversation went, the trade got done. My buddy acquired the 101, right? No, that's actually completely false. That 101 quickly turned into a playoff team. That team is now in the playoffs, and your 101 dreams is now anywhere between the 107 to the 112. And the reason I bring this up is because I think we do this thing where we just automatically assume all variables are in place because we know everything about every other player. And no matter how bad a roster looks, and I truly do believe in this specific situation, the roster looked terrible. I openly admit that. Things just panned out really well for this other manager, and they're now in the playoffs. That's awesome. Congrats to the other manager, too. They did a great job with some of the other trades that they've made throughout the season, and I think it's actually really worked out for them. But I think the big thing that I want to hit home about is really this like preconceived notion that just because you acquire a future first, like I actually tell everyone this whenever I have like offline conversations, I get like a DM, just assume that it's going to be a mid first at best. Like, think that your highest ceiling for that pick is going to be anywhere between the 104 to the 106. Because like you legitimately have no idea what is going to happen on that other person's roster from now until the end of time. And like I said, this was supposed to be the 101, and now this person very well could end up with the 110, the 111, and that trade now looks truly terrible. Like, imagine sending Puka Nacua for Luther Barden. Like, I like Luther Barden. I think he's a very talented college player, but like, I don't want to take that risk on Luther Barden right now. You know what I mean? Like, it's
Mhm.
absolutely asinine. And we need to properly value the players that we currently roster when we're stuck in these situations. And this was one of those trades that happened on a team that was rebuilding too. So like I just don't understand why we do this thing where we want to sell elite assets for early picks when we're rebuilding, unless we're acquiring multiple early picks in our minds. And that's kind of, I guess, like my feedback here. Any thoughts that you have here?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think going that way and like, trading a premium asset for the 101, I totally agree there. I do think that it kind of works both ways in that you can trade what you think is your contending first super way too early and bad things happen. And then your first is all of a sudden 103. And so I think like that happened to me like this year. And I think it's a lesson in like, you don't need to use your first that early on to improve your roster unless it's like an absolute slam dunk deal, which we know what those are when we see them. But I mean, outside of that, it's probably more often than not worth holding that first into the middle of the season and seeing where you're at before you move off of it, because it can go real south. So that's kind of where my head was at on it. But yeah, we can't be in the business of predicting where our opponents are going to land, this time next year. I think that, there's probably certain leagues where there's not that much activity and you can be like, yep, that team's going to suck for a while. But it's like all of our leagues are pretty active to the point of like, if somebody looks like they're not a contender, they could easily be a contender within the same year. And so if you're in a league like that where there's a lot of activity, you can't expect, or you can't again be in the business of like predicting these kind of things, and making moves on those assumptions and those predictions. Just not smart business. So yeah, good conversation for sure. Did you want to talk about anything else within that conversation before we move on?
No, I would just say to really hit home the point is like if you are
Mhm.
going to sell those types of assets, not the draft capital, but the actual elite players,
Yeah.
make sure that you have proper insurance on the actual trade itself. Like make sure that it's a slam dunk for you and don't give in to the odds of probability. I obviously all of this is odds of probability when you're acquiring players that you have no control over their careers, but like at least if you're going to trade Puka, like make sure that you're acquiring some other form on top of that first to
Yeah.
kind of relieve some of the doubt of what could happen to that first. And instead, you put all of the emphasis onto one isolated pick and anything could happen. So that would be my one takeaway. Otherwise, keep doing what you're doing. Keep projecting what you want to project. I think that's one of the worst parts about Dynasty Daddy. And some of the best things about Dynasty Daddy is that we see, those preseason rebuilder or, frisky
Hmm.
titles and things like that for teams. And we say, oh, they're not gonna compete this year. And we just take that as the truth. And that's just unfortunately not the truth. So yeah.
Absolutely. No, love it. Okay. Success criteria. We've definitely talked about this. We've definitely talked about this before. But what is success to us, right? And obviously, that I think changes depending on what you're actually trying to do. For we're a dynasty, so you could be rebuilding. What does success look like from that perspective? What does it look like, from a contender perspective? For me, it's definitely not so black and white. Like it's not like you either win the championship or not. I mean, I guess that's more so for the rebuilding type teams. Obviously, if I'm contending, I think that the success is, did I get into the playoffs and was I competitive in the playoffs? If you're so hard on yourself that uh, the only thing that determines success is either the amount of money or championships you won, you're going to be pretty upset, I think, most years. And that comes from somebody who's been pretty successful, fortunately, in my dynasty career thus far. But still, I think that if you think you're going to win all these leagues, you're going to be pretty disappointed. I've had better years than this year over the regular season where teams just got booted, and you're like, how does that even happen? But so I think if you're limiting your idea of success to a championship, you're just going to be pretty displeased. But yeah, we can delve into it a little further. What do you think, Jake?
Yeah, it's funny that you brought up the conversation that I pushed out to the rest of the Discord, and thanks for shouting that conversation out. Basically, I was just doing my annual playoff check-in, asking how everyone fared this year, and specifically if they did not make the playoffs, like what were their intentions with their team? Were they intentionally rebuilding? Did they have to pivot mid-year? Did they just straight up miss playoffs? And I think like for almost everyone that responded, and I appreciate everyone. We had, I think it was like 12 or 14 different responses, and they were all really, really awesome write-ups too. Like the biggest thing that I noticed is that when you are building a team to compete in a specific calendar year and it doesn't make the playoffs, that is the biggest notion of unsuccess or a lack of success for that team. Like that is a true failure for a team. Whereas making playoffs is a success, and then also getting either the 101 to the 102, I would say, is also measured as success. But it's funny because as a rebuilder, if you hit the 103, I do think that there's a pretty big cutoff there to being an unsuccessful rebuilder from getting the early pick. And it's a very interesting conversation because in so much of what we've ever competed in as childhood athletes or people who play video games or board games or whatever it is, like you only think of things as winning and losing. And this isn't the type of game where winning and losing is so defined by literal the money that you're acquiring in a league. It's really about this like conceptual valuation that you have of how good of a chance am I going to provide this team, this roster to compete in this window. What does this window look like? How do I define a dynasty, right? Like there's a reason why this format is considered what it's considered, right? Like how do I actually properly create a dynasty team, a team that is competing year over year over year? And I think we see this so much specifically in startups, specifically with people who haven't played dynasty before. Like they go all out. Like redraft mentality in startup year is real, and people create fantastic teams that can score close to 200 points per week, and that team may not be in existence come year 3 because either they're gone, it's an orphan, or like they've completely decimated that starting lineup to the point of non-existence, or they let players just completely die off and there was no way to properly move through the lineup or roster. And so I almost use this as an opportunity to start thinking a little bit more and bringing back once again that project managing your team conversation. I always love when we kind of bring in other conversations that we've had throughout the year. And it was funny because Billy brought that video up this week and I was already thinking about it because I was thinking of success criteria. The way that we define success criteria isn't usually just like through a singular metric, right? It isn't, did I win in this individual year? And especially when we're thinking about it in this dynasty lens, I think it has to be much larger. And I think there has to be many more milestones. And so I always appreciate, specifically in the Discord this week, that everyone was so open and honest about how, success really does feel like making the playoffs because you only have so much control over it. But I would say that the only other thing on top of that is the layer of success, because I do think that we've talked about this in the past, but being able to acquire some form of a first round bye definitely builds into an extra layer of success. So start measuring those little milestones and those differentiations, because I don't think just making the playoffs is good enough anymore. Like we need to start thinking about how we're making it into the playoffs. And that's how we start measuring those smaller things. So I would say that that's how I kind of value or look at it differently between contending versus rebuilding. Yeah. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think I pretty much agree with everything you're saying there in terms of like the incremental like rewarding yourself incrementally, I guess I should say, depending on like how you got into the playoffs, initially, those kind of things. Like if your team was rebuilding, for the better part of the last year and a half, can I get myself to this point in the playoffs? Okay, awesome. Okay, I got myself, whatever, to the bottom of the playoffs. And it's like, okay, the next year, can I get myself closer to a bye? That kind of thing. It's like you can definitely target out different goals for yourself, depending on where you're at with your team. And I think it obviously, you like, for me, like I don't sit down and like jot down my goals for each one of my leagues. Probably would be helpful, to be honest. But every team I look at, as I'm looking through it, you're building ideas of, okay, like, where does this team need to be? What do I need to get there? How many picks do I want to acquire by the end of the year to make me feel good enough about my, position to get to where I want to go, or whatever it may be. That's just an example. So I think that, if you're thinking about it that way, it makes it a lot easier to navigate year to year, like, with small wins along the way, and not being just like, oh my God, I'm failing every time I keep trying to do this one thing. Like, it doesn't have to be that one thing. And so, yeah, it's a great conversation. The success criteria, it's tough to, like, after the slog of the season that you go through each year with all the injuries and everything, it's kind of hard to keep perspective. So it's nice to talk about, what success means to us, and like how we can maximize, I guess, our at least feeling of success in those moments, and also how we can maximize like our ability to improve and be real with ourselves. I think that's part of it as well. A big part of it. Okay. Moving on. Tanking championship trophy. Okay, this is what I was talking about. Real quick reach back to last week where we were talking about the tanking championship. We're talking about, the max points for race, those kinds of things. Update: who won the championship? This was between Uriah and Jake. Uriah sucked more. Good job. Congrats. You were worse.
It's honestly really incredible when you think, and this is why I put it in the sheet where I did, because I really do feel like I failed. I failed my builds this season where I intentionally built it so that I would literally finish in dead last for max points for. I made, I think, 11 trades in that league to shed points off my team, and I couldn't do it to save the fucking life of the team to get the 101, mainly because I think Jaden Daniels overperformed out the fucking wazoo. I think Malik Neighbors early in the season overperformed, believe way past expectations. Brian Thomas
Too many good
Jr.
players. Too many good
Yeah,
players.
I drafted well to my own fault, right? To my own demise. I really tried my damnedest to get Cole Kmet off my team early in the season, and he really screwed me. But yeah, I think like small things like that definitely could have changed the way that this went. And yeah, I think Uriah got a little lucky with some certain injuries. The Anthony Richardson benching, things like that definitely helped. Anthony Richardson just also sucking in general for a
All
period
part of
of
the
time.
plan, Jake.
So,
Please leave tanking to the professionals. Lapisaurus, absolutely. Listen,
yeah.
man.
We just got lucky enough to have Lapisaurus join us in DU2. I'm sure he's going to shred that team to its literal skeleton core and start from literal scratch. That man is a professional tanker. I wouldn't say he's a professional rebuilder, but he definitely knows how to tank. That guy is.
First order of business was selling off some players, that's for sure. So he's already well underway on the deconstruction of said team. But no, we're happy to have him.
Deconstruction. I love that. The demolition of
The demolition.
yeah.
No, I'm excited to play with Lapisaurus. He's definitely awesome in the Discord, and happy to have him there. It's fun. Yeah, but like on the max points for thing, or on your tanking championship, whatever you want to call it. I think it's funny because it's like, I get where you're coming from, the feeling of failure, but there's probably not much you could have done. I mean, maybe getting rid of Cole Kmet earlier, but you can only do what you can do. But like in my head, I'm like, is it worth getting the 101 if you have to give up some of the greatness, the underlying greatness, the peripheral greatness of your team, right? Where it's like, I almost think like you might be fine with the 102. You know what I mean? Like it's okay. And we talked about it this year with like Caleb, and you'd be happy with other, the 102, whatever you got at 102, just as much as you would with getting Caleb or Marv, getting Neighbors or Jaden, those kind of things. So it's like, I get where you're coming from with that, but I do think that that's just something I've always not cared about, really, was like those like little, I mean, I care about the edges, but those like 101 to 102 edges, I'm like, I kind of let those things go sometimes. As much as you put in the hard work to get down there, you're down there. 102 is good.
I will say, to your point, and you make a really good point. I think truly I know exactly which player it was that fucked me the most. His name's Tyrone Tracy. And you know this. I tried selling Tyrone Tracy for probably a good 4 weeks for, I think it was 2 seconds. Couldn't get it done. And I finally sold him. I think it was the week before.
Wait, was
playoffs.
this all in League of Legends? This was all in League of Legends? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I finally sold him in the final week of the season for first. And so, like, to your point, is the gap between those 2 seconds that I never got and the first big enough to usurp the 101 to the 102? And I think it is. So
I do
yeah.
too.
So I think that was a really, for my own mental health purposes, I think it was a really good exercise, or I'm really glad I listened to you talk about that situation, because I do think I now automatically, I already feel better. Like immediately once you said that, I was like, damn, he's really got a point, because I think what I had to go through that process to get what I ended up getting onto that team actually really helped my team more than the gap between the 101 and the 102. And hopefully I can sell out of the 102 anyway. So we'll be fine.
Look for the bill in the mail. Therapy session. You're welcome. Awesome. All right. Great conversation. We are moving right along here. I think we're going to do Discord mailbag, and then we're going to hop into a couple trades, and we will get on out of here after that. Let's jump into the Discord mailbag. This should be good. And shout out once again, everybody in the Discord. Hop in the Discord if you are just a listener. It's a lot of fun in there, a lot of great information. Connect with us, all the good stuff, all that good stuff. Are we worried about teams out of the playoff picture, like NFL playoff picture, reducing workload on older players to preserve for future years, i.e. Kamara? Short answer for me is yes. They have done this before. They will do it again. You can already, like, I was already thinking about this for like the Bengals and teams like that. I'm like, please just stay in the playoff race, please. Because like I need these 45-point Jamar Chase games to continue. I need all of this to continue, and I don't need the Justin Herbert, Keenan Allen experience of last year. And that was, extenuating because Keenan Allen is older than, any given player, but still it's that idea is they shut it down because their team wasn't going anywhere. There were some injuries. Boom, done. That's a perfect example. You have that, and you are now starting DJ Turner or whatever it is, or Trey Tucker, or you name it. Like you're just starting some rando because nobody's playing. So I think it's a real worry, and it's one of those things that you can try to identify, but in Dynasty, it's like, what are you going to do? Trade a player away completely to get ahead of that kind of potential outcome? No, and you're not going to give up Dynasty value most of the time to get ahead of these kind of things because you're not going to know. So it's just one of those things that is a real factor in fantasy. I don't know. You got any thoughts on that, Jake?
No, I don't. I believe exactly in everything that you said. I agree with it. Yeah. And I'm literally just looking at the NFL standings right now, and I guess like my heart automatically kind of like is thumping to the thoughts of what's going to happen in Dallas. Like I can totally see CeeDee Lamb's been on the injury report for the last 4 weeks. I can totally see like a week 17 shutdown. I definitely can see that. I could probably see it maybe happening in Chicago if DJ Moore has a small injury going into those final 2 weeks. Keenan Allen again, maybe.
Dude, the Dolphins lose a game and they're out of it.
Yeah, the Dolphins are a great example. Yep. That's absolutely terrifying to the entire offense. Talk about Devon Achane, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, who have all also underperformed. San Francisco, if you have any of the healthy guys there, I guess you're just happy that you have a healthy player on San Francisco's offense, but they're teetering, but they probably can play up until the final week, so they look fine. And then outside of that, the rest of the teams in the AFC that are out are pretty bad, except for maybe the Jets from an offensive perspective. I would probably be certain that Breece Hall, if he even comes back, will probably only get 50% snap share. He wasn't getting much higher than that in some of the weeks of late anyway. He had that like 5-game window after, or 4-game window after the Robert Saleh firing, that he kind of came back into the true running back one. And then it seems like they knew that he was kind of dealing with a small injury, and it's now turned into a bigger injury. There's already Garrett Wilson trade rumors coming out this morning. I don't know if you saw those.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't look good in that team in general. And yeah, I think that those are kind of scary situations. I think this is actually a really great mailbag question, and I don't remember who asked it, so I apologize, but shout out to you, whoever brought it up.
Yeah, and I would say this about like bye weeks and everything. Like similarly, like if you can find, a Justin Jefferson and a Jamar Chase type combination, where it's like, oh, I can move this for that and get ahead of the bye week, or this for that and not have to deal with the potential that the team just sits them, like a CeeDee Lamb for a JJ or something like that. You know what I mean? Where it's like, if you can do those kind of things, like I'm all for it. Like get ahead of this shit, get away from this shit, as long as you're kind of maintaining all the dynasty value. I've done that before with quarterbacks and beating bye weeks in like console wars where we play like a week 14 playoff kind of run.
That's so smart.
Yeah, I've done that where I'm like, all right, I'll just trade. I was like, I don't think this was it, but it was like Kyler for Dak, or that kind of like something that was like similarly valued, where it was like, yeah, like we'll just keep the dynasty value rolling, but at least be able to continue to compete and do what I need to do. So that's kind of where my head goes with it. But otherwise, you just got to kind of deal with it. But it is a real thing. Okay. Who is the best player available for contending second at each position? Oh, this is a good one. I didn't do my homework on this, so we'll be kind of winging it. But yeah, the running backs are so easy, and like even if you didn't put this down, this is who I thought of when I first saw the question in the Discord. But for running backs, it's super like it's James Conner for sure. Like that's the easiest one. I think did you put these here? Did you put Monty?
No, these were actually provided by the person who submitted the question.
Oh, really? Yeah, I think Monty's a good one too. You probably could get him for like a second. Who's good? Yeah, nobody's sending a first for Monty. So yeah, I think those are two really good ones. But James Conner is so easily accessible for a second round pick. I think like at quarterback, Will Levis might be like one of the only worthwhile quarterbacks for a second, like where you're like, this isn't the worst trade I'm ever making for like. Any quarterback who's worth a second round pick is not a very good quarterback, is kind of what I'm getting at. And so at least Levis has some like potential where it's like, all right, giving up a second, maybe a second and a third isn't like the worst thing you could ever do in a tight spot if you need a guy. That's kind of what I think about for quarterback. Does anybody come to mind for you?
I think it really depends on connotation. I think you maybe could get that out of someone for Kirk Cousins, given how he's performed over the last 5 weeks. Maybe it's a contending second and a third or something like that. I would be kind of fine with that, honestly. I think you're dealing with a guy who's coming off of a major Achilles injury, and people had really unfair expectations for him. I think going into next season, he'll be more okay, not better. If that's fair. Okay. I think Russ is probably in a similar boat. Maybe Russell Wilson's like a mid second. Maybe he's not a true contending second, but he's somewhere near there. I think you could probably get him off of the right team, given his week to week output. You probably missed the ship on Jameis Winston, to be honest, but Jameis Winston would have been the guy probably 2 weeks ago before that blow up game in Cleveland. But yeah, I think that those are the guys. Going back to the running back conversation, the only other guy that I think fits into the conversation is Aaron Jones, if that's what you want. I don't really.
If you want to be miserable next year, wondering where your second went, then Aaron Jones.
He's the guy. There are some really interesting guys in that same vein. You have guys like Rashad White who are kind of in and around that same value, who might have a larger window and maybe go on to a better situation next year. Guys like Tank Bigsby, I don't really love. They're in that same value range. I probably wouldn't do
Not
it.
for a second.
Yeah, I would honestly, we were talking about this before, but if you can send a contending second for Jonathan Brooks,
Yeah.
I would be happy with that, honestly. Um, that seems like a good way to get a very high profile running back. Of course, one who has just dealt with 2 ACL tears, but a very, very like well worthy risky asset to take on, I think, with the high upside, just knowing that, that's not going to hit your roster probably for another 2 years. So if you can, maybe even try and send, I think Billy had made that point before, like a 26 second. Like, I'm not going to really see him until 2026. So maybe that's when I get him on my roster type mentality. But yeah, I think for those 2 positions, that's kind of where I stand. Any others that stick out?
Uh, Not necessarily at those positions, but looking to wide receiver, I'm thinking about guys like Cooper Cup, Cortland Sutton. I mean, Cortland Sutton maybe even less, but like Cooper Cup, that range of players probably for like a second round pick, the best that you're gonna do. Outside of that, I'm not sure.
I think the wide receiver market's pretty inflated, to be honest. Like, I don't know if you're getting Cooper Cup for a contending second.
That's crazy. Okay. I mean, Christian Watson.
Yeah, I think Christian Watson is probably the better name. Not better name. I just think he
Yeah.
fits. He
Better
fits
fits.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, he fits this conversation a little bit better. Calvin Ridley.
Calvin
Question
Ridley.
mark?
Yep. I was just about to say Calvin Ridley. Yeah. I think that actually is like a decent player for a second round pick. Like, I think that's a good trade.
Devontae
Uh,
Adams.
I wonder if somebody's still going to try to pull a first out of that. But yeah, like, I don't know. But that's one of those teams where we're talking about shutting down players. Like, I don't
He's
know if I,
he's
yeah. And
definitely
like,
one of
he's
them.
old enough where like, I
Yeah.
don't know if I want to do that right now, like play that game. So that's a tough one. Amari Cooper, maybe I'd be more comfortable going for the second.
Yes.
Because like, I know he's been dealing with the wrist injury, but it looks like he's getting a little healthier and over the weeks, building the chemistry. So that might actually like just all culminate at the right time if you do that. So I like that. Outside of that, I'm probably holding my second. I don't want to be trading a second really for like Demario Douglas and co.
Yeah. It looks pretty bad in the wide receiver market, is what I would say.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think like you're going to be, disappointed, I guess, for lack of a better term, with most of what you're getting at kind of those prices. So yeah, tight end at a second round pick. Tight end at a second round pick is like, I mean, listen, if you can get an Njoku, but like for a contending second, you're probably not getting that. So like a contending second, maybe you can still get into like some Cade Otton, or you're not getting Travis Kelce because maybe Cade Otton's this team, it's cooled off a little bit for him. But then like I think you're looking at maybe the Jonnu Smith, Pat Freiermuth world. Would
Evan
you take
Ingram?
a? Yeah, maybe, but
Or do
like
they
again,
shut him down?
they might shut him down too. And the only
Yeah.
reason you're getting him for a second is because Trevor Lawrence isn't playing, because Mac
True.
Jones is playing. So it's like it comes with baggage. But I guess most things do when you're just trading a second. But still, like I don't know, kind of going back to the contender conversation, like moving players as a contender, would you move Jonnu Smith for a second?
Would I move Jonnu Smith off my roster for a second?
Off your roster for a second.
I
No
think
matter who the roster is, just call it a mid second, like a base second.
Yeah, assuming that he's not my starting tight end and I'm using him as a flex, yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's tough. It's crazy with how well he's played. I mean, I know last week came down to basically overtime. Otherwise, it would have been nothing. But yeah, it's just crazy with how well he's played. It doesn't feel amazing, but I do agree with you there. I think so too. Anybody else?
Yeah, the only other guy that's slightly interesting for me, and we've talked about him over the last few weeks, is JT Sanders.
Yeah.
He kind of sits there in that range, and I would be more than happy. Not like, here's the thing is I don't always think about my contending picks in terms of like now. I'm just thinking of them in terms of like how this asset is going to help benefit my team. And I do think that there is a range of outcomes where JT Sanders creeps up into that late first territory. I think I saw enough from his tape. Unfortunately, I watched a lot of Carolina Panthers tape this year. Billy knows this. I watched way too much Xavier Legette.
Too much to get.
And because of the way that some of the online products that you can watch tape on, I won't talk about it because I threw Billy under the bus last time. It's very easy to see other teammates tape within the same groupings. And so, yeah, I watched a lot of JT Sanders tape. The dude honestly looks significantly better than I thought he did in college. Same thing with Jalen Coker. So, yeah, I would say that JT Sanders for a late second, if I can get him for an early third.
Get on the Coker train, baby.
Yeah. I'm all over it. I'm all over it. But yeah, I think that was a good exercise. I think we covered all the positions.
Yeah, I think that's good. Final piece of that question was, are there any 2025 situations that scare you away from an aging running back, given how heavy the draft class is at running back? And like, it's hard to judge this early on. I really think it's not something we should be doing that much of in terms of like, okay, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to be concerned. But I mean, if we're just trying to peer into the future a little bit, thinking about like maybe Tony Pollard in Tennessee might get some competition, some added competition. Maybe a Najee Harris, but that there's already enough competition there. Maybe they keep it the same. But like outside of that, like I'm not sure there's a ton I'm looking at that are going to be acquiring running backs for these like veterans.
Chargers.
Yeah, that was. It's funny. I was gonna say that, but I thought it was kind of like low hanging fruit with J.K. Dobbins being already injured. But
it's fair. Aaron Jones, Minnesota.
Yes. Aaron Jones, Minnesota for sure. I think that's a good one too.
The Giants probably end up drafting another running back next year. It's not an aging running back situation, but I would say that would be. I would say that is one of the major reasons why I'm out on Tyrone Tracy. I would say in general is that I just don't think that the general performance of the entire package of Tyrone Tracy is a startable running back for a competitive NFL team. And especially if the Giants end up having a relatively large change in the front office and head coaching space, I just don't see Tyrone Tracy having an extended career in New York. But those would be the team. DeAndre Swift in Chicago.
You're nailing it. Yeah, that's one for sure. I agree with. I know you got a good contract there, but it's not working. So I think over time, I mean, it's a product of a bad offensive line too, but I think over time he's just going to, like the age and the contract, it's going to all age out. You know what I mean? So yes. I think that's a good concern. Javonte Williams, I think the whole Denver situation is kind of a candidate, but also low key, Rico Dowdle, 26-year-old. Like he'll probably get a job somewhere else, but if it's in Dallas, I'd still be concerned that they're going to add a premium player there, and then that's going to just tank his value. But he'll probably get a contract from some absolute moronic organization, and we should watch out anyway and be concerned about him. But I think those are the kind of. I think we nailed it.
I have two other weird ones. I wouldn't say that they're. Okay. One is an aging out running back, and the other one is not, but unfortunately, not consistently injured. The first one is San Francisco. I think they probably find another way to bring in another running back. That's just who they are, and they're constantly churning in running backs into that running back room. And I think the other one, funny enough, is going to be Seattle. I know.
Oh God.
Kenneth Walker is on the edge of his rookie deal, right? He's going into year 4 next year.
Yeah.
I think that there's a very good chance that they could bring in another running back and then try and move it into a Charbonnet and somebody else in that running back's year 2. I think that those types of rooms, though, are going for later round running backs. I'm not saying that they're trying to bring in elite talent, but I think it's just really interesting to see how those teams interact in the draft, just so that you kind of have a good understanding of what future windows look like. And then there's also really unique free agents that are going to be out there. I'm not saying that these guys are good, but I do think they're going to go in and disrupt running back rooms, just like Jamal Williams did when he went to Detroit and had a great season. Guys like AJ Dillon, who are just going to probably be NFL running backs, even though we don't like them. Those are guys who fuck up rosters, for lack of better words, and depth charts that I think that we tend to overlook because we don't like them statistically. But the NFL teams know that they have other value than just being a fantasy scorer. So guys to look out for, I'd say.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Awesome. All right. Last Discord mailbag question. Fair price for Kyren Williams as a Corum owner. What is the fair price for Kyren Williams as a Blake Corum owner? I don't know if it matters if you're a Corum owner or not, I guess, but like a fair price. I mean, it's like a 26 first, right? Like that's kind of, I mean, like I know he's scoring a ton of points, but he's definitely not the most stable type of dynasty asset or just running back. I mean, draft capital, smaller guy, all the above. Has a guy in the backfield who we're talking about, Blake Corum, who can definitely play. So, I mean, like you're going to get bent over for Kyren though right now. Like nobody's giving you Kyren for just a straight 26 first. And if they see you're the Corum owner or the Corum manager, they're going to probably try to add a premium onto it knowing that, you're trying to do this for a reason. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Jake?
Yeah, I think this is the way in which when you're acquiring these types of handcuffs, I do find that it's very challenging to interact with people in a logical way. But I do think that it's probably somewhere in that, like, I don't know, probably mid first range and plus. I think that's what someone's going to ask of you. I'm just looking at Dynasty Daddy's database right now. Funny enough, one of the top trades is Blake Corum and Kyren Williams for a 25 first and Ricky Pearsall. Another one is Kyren for a 26 first and 26 second. I think that's probably what someone's going to charge you for Kyren. If you are the Blake Corum owner, I would say that a more fair offer would probably be something like this, like Kyren for a first and a third. I would say that feels like a fair market value to get those types of points on your team. But yeah, Kyren for Javonte and a 25 first is an interesting package. But yeah, I think it's probably a first and a second is somewhere in that range, I would say, is what you're going to get charged as a Blake Corum owner.
And as a Corum manager, I mean, I would assume that there's not a ton of I don't know why I would assume this, but it feels like if you have Corum on your team, you're probably more in the rebuilder life. But like I would only be adding Kyren if I'm a top end contender. Flip this: fair price to sell Corum to the Kyren manager. A fair price probably is like a third round pick. But I don't think anybody's selling him for that. And then if you're talking about the Kyren manager, you're like, this guy is going to pay a premium. So you're going to be
early second.
Yeah.
201 right now.
Yeah.
That turns out to be the 208. Blake's value is interesting on here as well. He just went for Isaiah Davis and Jalen Coker today.
I'd take Blake Corum for that.
I would too.
No,
Debo Samuel.
Isaiah Davis looks pretty nice though. Isaiah Davis looks nice. I liked it. I thought it was he wasn't bad coming out either. He was a nice little guy.
Yeah, I preferred him over Braylon Allen. Funny enough, but that's just, I think that was also due to competition that he was playing against. But anyway, Debo Samuel for Blake Corum seems interesting. I think Debo. I do think that maybe Debo Samuel is
There's
good
be a
contender
to get out of Debo. I feel
but I was gonna say I think Debo Samuel is a good contender for that. If that like kind of cheap wide receiver asset that has relatively high upside that you could probably get into as a contender this year that
Yeah.
maybe you save someone else's decrepit roster from. Uh, I would start probably with like an early third or something like that if I had it, and just kind of test the waters, maybe 2/3, be like, it's better than what he's doing on your roster, you know? But
Somebody was trying to get a second off me for Debo, and I was like, it's like, and they were like, "What do you think?" And I was like, "I think this is probably a bad idea for me," so I didn't do it. But yeah, that's where the value has gotten to. So start with a third for sure.
I like this offer actually. Isaac Guerrero for Blake Corum and 2/3.
Oh wow, I would love the Blake Corum side on that.
Me too. How do I get that? I've been begging for that shit in
But I mean,
console wars.
Garando, like these guys are going to stick around in some capacity for San Francisco. So I'm not saying to trade for them at that price at all. But I don't want to completely poo-poo them like that. Like I do think that he has a chance to be like successful, but it's
Definitely.
like we've seen what successful for non-CMC looks like in that offense, and it's sporadic. So don't want to get over our skis on that. Just saying.
Oh, I've
Okay,
never heard that saying before. I'm from a
over
Florida
our
man.
skis.
From a Florida
Over our
man that
skis,
feels
really?
I feel yeah, never. Never. I
Yeah, come on.
understand it. I understand its meaning. It's just I've
Yeah,
never heard that.
got to be versatile, all right, brother.
Yeah.
Don't matter. I've been here down in Florida my whole life, but I know some shit. All right, us dummies down here know some stuff, Jake. The ones you left behind, we know things. Oh boy! All right, cool. Let's hop into some trades, non-trades, and get on out of here. Compounding trades, 10 teams, Superflex, PPR. I'm not even looking at Jake anymore. I can just hear the undertones of laughter.
Couldn't stop. All right, I'm going. I'm good.
Okay, compounding trades. Aaron Jones. This is 10 team Superflex PPR, 10 team. Aaron Jones for a 27 second. And then Chuba Hubbard plus a 27 fourth for a 25 second.
So
Well,
this
go ahead.
worked out, just so you're aware of what I meant by compounding trades. The manager sold Aaron Jones for a 27 second, and then they took their own 25 contending second and then bought Chuba Hubbard and the 27 fourth.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's exactly how I'd have it. I mean, that's incredibly low price for Chuba. I don't understand that at all. But yeah, like in trading Aaron Jones for a 27 second, it's not like super optimal in terms of what you want to get back, but you're not going to get more than a second in any year, really. So I'm fine with that. And then turning around and selling your contending 25 second for Chuba is just Smashville. Not really much else need to be said about that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I added this honestly because one, shout out to a new Discord member that we have, and two, I just thought this was just really great process of how to properly work through the basically what we were talking about before. This is true creating trade creativity in the sense of like maneuvering your contending roster out of a situation with like an aging running back and using that same asset because you saw that you could take one asset and then kind of flip it. It's not the same pick, obviously, but you can flip that pick now that's sitting into your draft capital back into something that is going to bring on actually more points per game, which is pretty crazy for not a crazy price. And that 27 second could literally be anything. It could even be the 201 or the 212.
Or the 212. Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, 210
And
because it's 10 teams.
210, yes. And a little bit of the cascading trade effect here, too, where like one trade got done, somebody else seemingly wanted to get in.
Yes.
Oh, I can get a second as well. And maybe I can get off of a running back, aging running back, whatever they want to call Chuba, and thinking that it's kind of a heady play. Not really sure how they thought that given the prior deal and how the value doesn't quite add up or, can't square those two things really. But I do think that, again, even if illogical, that psychological effect does happen with the cascading trade effect, as we'll call it. Anyway, moving on. T. Higgins for 26 first plus Jonu plus Corum. Interesting trade. I mean, I'd like to know a little bit more about that 26 first, but even if it's like mid, I'll probably take Higgins there still. It's close, but I'd probably take Higgins. What about you, Jake?
Interesting.
What?
We'll see if it's true. This was an offer I was going to send you, and I intentionally put it on the show sheet. I would be looking to get the 26 first Jonu and Corum, and I'd be sending you Higgins. It was funny because you had posted in a league chat today that our values weren't going to be on point, and then I very smartly put this into the show sheet to see if they would be. And now I know for a fucking fact, when I send this to you later, you are sure as shit not accepting it. And that's totally fine. I just wanted to see this on a recorded.
I don't even remember what you're talking about. I don't even remember what you're talking about. But it would have to make sense.
In DU3, I put Higgins out there. I was Higgins is for sale. And you said, and I quote,
I don't want to pay
not for your price. And I literally have just put my price in front of you and you've accepted it. But I know for a fact that when I send this to you after the show, you are not going to accept that offer. I know that. But we'll see. We'll see. I'm going to send it. I'm going to send it. We'll talk to you all next week and we'll find out. But I'm going to send it and we'll see.
I like Higgins a lot. Like it's funny coming off of like those poor performances. Like it feels nasty trading like good things away for a player. But I don't think that's far off for Higgins. Like, I mean, I think that you could probably do. I think you could probably take Jonu and Corum and liquidate them and maybe feel a little bit better about what you have. But you'd have to work overtime, I think, to do that, which you would do. So I do think you could get it done. But yeah, no, I'm not accepting that from you. Get out of here. Don't send that to me.
This is how we never get deals done. It's so ridiculous.
What do you mean? It's super hard. It's funny. You're talking about like the amount of trades we do and all that, and like I'm like one of my biggest holdups clearly is leagues that I'm in with people I know well. I don't trade that much because like I just know it's going to be an arduous process, and I know that it's going to be towing the lines of value the entire time. You know what I mean? So it's like if there's a play, like often what you do in Dynasty is you're like searching for the edges. Okay, there's a lower value player. Let me go attack that. And it's like half the time it's on one of your rosters, and I'm like, fuck it. Like, let me just move on. You know what I mean? And so like it eliminates like those potential trades, I guess, sometimes. But it was funny because like one of the leagues I'm in with like with Paul Patterson of Pure Potential and Chris and Ben, and like it's that Pokemon league with all the funky rules. It's actually a really fun league. But I was like looking at my trades because I remember the only trade I made was where I got a 4th for moving back like just a couple spots in the startup with Paul. I didn't make any other trades, and I'm like, and my team just made the playoffs or whatever. My team's good. Like but like I could see where the holes are in my team, and I'm just like, you didn't do anything about it. But it's like you would have been pressed hard as shit to like a point where you didn't want to give up the things that you would have to give up to like make headway. So it's like I tend to be very, very calculated to the point where I probably miss out on stuff. So yeah, I don't know how I got there, but I guess just realizing that we don't make that many trades. That's why, for sure. I mean, that's part of the reason why. I don't know. You're part of the problem too, but that's my reason why.
Dude, all I'm telling you,
I don't get many offers from you.
I'm just saying, play back the tape. Play back the tape when you're going through the production process and you're editing this, and you looked at that trade and you said I would take the Higgins side, but now that you know that it's coming from me.
In a vacuum, no, but it may be the team. The context matters. I didn't know the context. Now that I know it's me, no, but now that DU3, my team is pretty loaded, so it's like, do I really need to add Higgins and give up a 26 first? Like, I don't know. So you know, it's context matters, of course, but. What my point is that you don't send a ton of offers, and they aren't great when you do send them. I'm not saying I do either, but I'm saying there's two. It takes two to tango. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
All right.
I think that the last time you sent me an offer for Higgins, it was like Stephon Diggs, Chase Brown in the offseason, and
Oh God.
Keenan Allen, I think, and James Cook. I think that's what it was. And it would have ended up being a totally fine trade from like a point scoring perspective, but like that's not an offer I want in my inbox. Like
You don't want all the players that I don't want.
at least this offer looks like I'm losing. Like, like the offer you sent me, like I knew I was losing. You know what I mean?
And that was the point.
Yeah.
Okay, so okay. Last one I have on here. I feel like there was another one I actually wanted to talk about, but last one I have on here is Etienne for a 25-second. Travis Etienne for a 25-second.
Do you know where that second lies?
I think. Oh yes, yes. Sorry, it's probably going to be early.
Ooh. Man, I think if I knew that this second was going to sit somewhere in like the 205 to 207 range, I'd feel more confident. But I do think that you could still probably land on a running back that might have a better situation than Travis Etienne come rookie draft season. This is a tough one, though. I do think that this can go either way. And I wouldn't be upset acquiring Etienne at that cost, considering that I'm an idiot and I've acquired way shittier running backs I think I acquired Dalvin Cook last year for like 2 seconds, I want to say, before his demise. Yeah, no, I think that's what happened. It was in the offseason. And now I never trade for running backs, and then I did it again this year for an even shittier running back. But anyway, yeah, I think knowing what I just said, I'm learning from my mistakes, and no, I would not do this.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Etienne's not Dalvin Cook, like many years younger and all that.
Yes.
No, I'm not. Your point's well taken, but I think for a 26-second, I'd be comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just that's good for sure. I do think Etienne's one of those guys who I want to try to get in on, like between this time and sometime in the off season before news starts spreading about where he's going to be and what's going to happen with him. But I just think he's like one of those running backs who's super undervalued and is going to rebound in a real way, and it's a lot more situationally, like it's a lot more contextual than it is anything else, where it's like injury and team situation related than it is he just became a bad player all of a sudden. And so I do kind of like this price. But yeah, if you can swing like a third and I don't know, some players, or if you can do a 26-second, or if you can do a second in Etienne and a third, 25-second Etienne and a third, I'd probably be comfortable doing that. But I just think he's a guy who we should be looking at trying to acquire. And so that's why I had him on here. I didn't get this trade done or anything. I sent a 26-second. They sent back a 25-second. And I think I declined, or it might just be sitting there. And I was like, yeah, I don't really think I should do that. And it's also, again, like an early second because my team's rebuilding, but I'm just looking for ways to acquire value. You know what I mean? And so even though it doesn't feel like the right move because you're a rebuilder and like buying running backs right now doesn't feel right, I do feel like it could be lucrative at the end of the day. That said, I do think that you have some time. Like, you don't need to rush about it, which is why I'm not like out here like accepting that trade. I'm just like, whatever. Like, I think, if I wait, I could probably get him for the same price in a couple months. You know what I mean? Like, not much is going to change as long as the news cycles don't start, churning on the roster moves for next season, which will happen obviously sometime after the Super Bowl, but you have a little bit to go, I think, before that stuff happens. So that's where my head was at. Okay, got one added to the sheet. Let's see it. All right.
It just got added to the Discord, so I figured,
okay,
we're here. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Brian Thomas Jr. for 25-102. Brian Thomas Jr. for the 25-102. I'm probably taking the 102.
I am as well. Yes.
Yeah.
I think the 102 has more liquidity. I think the 102 can also be a few different things. I think the 102, even if it is Tet, I still prefer Tet over Brian Thomas Jr. I like Brian Thomas Jr. a lot. I do think it's actually pretty close in terms
Mm-hmm.
of like player to player side by side. But I think the pick is actually worth more than the player. I think the pick, to my point before, is open to so many opportunities. It could be Shadur Sanders in Las Vegas. It could be Cam Ward in New York. It could be other things. And it could even well be Ashton Genty on a team, depending on draft capital, right? Like we're so caught up in this idea that he's going to be the 101 right now. It feels very similar to the window of Bijan Robinson, to be completely honest.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like a lot of us just got so I think tunnel visioned on that idea that like I know even myself for the couple of leagues that I was in at the time, like I didn't do enough research outside of the top like 7 or 8 picks to really understand really what I was looking at. I remember going into that draft and not really being that in love with Bryce Young, so I knew I wasn't going to take him at the 101. But I think in retrospect, maybe CJ Stroud at the time, trading back wasn't really an option for me. I was just so gung ho on Bijan being able to trade back into like the 105 and get Jahmyr Gibbs plus sounds really nice now. Little things like that, I think, are how you really find windows in this game. And I think just put in the effort. If you have the 102, put in the effort to try and turn that 102 into something plus. I think you'll see that it's significantly more worth it than just going into a singular asset like Brian Thomas Jr. I'd much rather put that into, once again, Puka, for instance.
Right. Yeah. No, I love everything you said there. I agree. Okay, one more for you. Just a question. It's not a trade that went down. Actually, an offer I received. Which side would you take? 25, like late-ish first, or George Kittle and Jalen McMillan?
25 late-ish first. George Kittle, Jalen McMillan. What's the TEP?
0.5, so 1.5 for tight end catches.
Is it 25 first, you said?
Yeah.
I think I'm still probably going with the late first.
Okay. Yeah, and it's a rebuilding team that has the Kittle side, so that might be. But it just feels like you can get more. Like, and I don't mean that like you could just press for more from the same team. Not like everybody's out here trying to sell first round picks for George Kittle and Jalen McMillan, but it just feels like right now with what Kittle is producing, you should be able to maybe get like for those like you should be able to get the 25 first for Kittle straight. So it's like, why is McMillan added in? You know what I mean? Like that's kind of where I'm at with it, and maybe that's what I'll try to do is just retain an extra value in McMillan, and then just move Kittle for the first. That might be the move, but man, okay, yeah, that's tough.
That is tough. I think you broke it down really well, and I do think that I think Kittle is a very hard asset to work through right now, just like in general. To your point, he's performing at a very, very high level in terms of his production. And I think that in 0.5 TEP, we are finding ourselves not really seeing that much additional value. Like there's some value, but I really do think that you see a significant gap between 0.5 versus 0.75 and up. And in those more extreme premiums, I think that's really where you start seeing the value go towards the tight end when it should. But depending on, I guess, the actual lineup construction, if you have more free flowing lineups like we do in the DU leagues, in the DU listener leagues, I think there's a lot of value in being able to start a secondary tight end if your two tight ends are, for instance, I do this in some leagues, but like Kelsey and Kittle in the same league, like that's as good as most top 10 wide receivers on a weekly basis. So, that's a good way to go.
Awesome. Good stuff.
Yeah.
This is a really fun show. Had a
Cool.
lot of good stuff on the sheet today. Appreciate you, Jake. Thank you as always for being here.
Yeah, you did well, man.
Oh, did I? Okay, thank you. I'm glad I got your you're okay. I'm glad I got the stamp of approval from Jake. I did okay today. Awesome. No, you did great too, Jake. You did really well. We both did very good. This was a fun time. Jake, thank you again for putting the sheet together. I love the conversations that we had, the trade creativity, really fun, success criteria, all really, really topical. Anybody who wants to get in on the show, they want to, have questions for the mailbag, hop in the Discord, please. The links, I don't know how people are finding the links. Maybe you're just looking up Dynasty Underdog and finding it, or maybe you're going to Twitter like I keep saying and doing it. But yeah, keep doing that. Go to Twitter, find the links, hit me up, get the link, get into the Discord. Other than
Blue Sky.
Blue Sky. Blue Sky. Yeah, there you go. Blue Sky. We're all over the place here. So yeah, find us. Thank you everybody who joined the show. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Dynasty Underdog. Follow us on Twitter, on Blue Sky, wherever you can find us at Dynasty Underdog. Excuse me, at Dynasty Underdog, at Uri Dawkins, at Willie Beeman FF, and at Jake Abrams. Peace out, fam.